Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time zone you're living in, it's time for Sumud. All about humanity, so this right here for everyone. Uplift, amplify, empower everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time zone you're living in, it's time for Sumud.
Welcome today, Steve Sosebee, the Executive Director of HEAL Palestine, which stands for Health, Education, Aid, and Leadership. And he's also the co-founder of Palestine Children's Relief Fund and the former Executive Director. I have to tell you, Steve, when I met you for the first time in person the other day, the level of humility that you demonstrated, the level of empathy that you demonstrated, and how down to earth you were really surprised me because I work with a lot of different presidents, CEOs, executive directors, and it's a different experience. So I've got to ask you, where does that humility come from?
Well, thank you for saying that. I think first and foremost, I think I was raised in a kind of a small town in Ohio, so there's some Midwest component to it. But also, like, look, we're serving a cause greater than ourselves. At least I am, and whatever I do to serve the Palestinian people, particularly during this immense crisis, but throughout my life serving Palestine, there's always been some kind of crisis. Never one that we've seen like today in Gaza, but certainly it's with occupation, with intifadas, with so many previous bombings, and all of the huge challenges we faced on the ground in Palestine. There's no space for ego to come into play here. There's no space for any kind of personal aspect to what our role in our job is. We're here to do something for a people who are suffering and sacrificing for their freedom. And if you're here for any cause other than that, you shouldn't be doing this work. And I'm always have tried to pride myself on being accessible, but also staying connected to the people that I'm serving, and that's where I've always gotten the most satisfaction out of my work. The most energy in doing this kind of work has always come from working in the field with the people that we're serving, and I'm very honored to do that. So, and they've sacrificed so much. I mean, look, my parents were, uh, a high school teacher and a nurse. We come from a simple background, and our forefathers, they struggled so much to give me the opportunities to live in a free country with so many opportunity privileges, and that comes with also responsibilities to serve and to give back to those who are struggling for the basic rights I was born with. So nobody in the world is more deserving of that and who's sacrificed more than the Palestinian people. So I'm here to serve them. They're not here to serve me.
And it's fair to say that you're Palestinian as well, I believe at this point. Coming from another Palestinian, I believe you are Palestinian
Well,
in
that's
part.
the highest compliment you could give me. I do carry a Palestinian passport and a Palestinian ID, but I got that through family reunification, my first wife being Palestinian. But I believe just as you can come and be an American by immigrating and gaining citizenship, I hope that also you can become a Palestinian by serving the cause and being part of the culture and the people as much as one can as an outsider. So I'm very honored and privileged that you said that.
Yeah, you actually speak better Arabic than me, and my wife made fun of me for that, just so you know.
Well, in all
So
fairness, my wife makes fun of me all the time for my Arabic. I should speak better Arabic considering the amount of time I've lived in Palestine, but
yeah,
um,
yeah.
it is
Yeah.
what it is.
The other thing I wanted to point out when I first met you, you basically said you should actually just interview my wife, Dr. Zina Salman, right? And that's again, that's not usually what I come across. It's usually speak to my assistant to book, and you immediately pointed at her and said she's doing all of the work. So again, just the level of humility there is amazing.
I mean, there's people who definitely deserve, to be interviewed and to be heard, their voices much more than mine. And Zena's definitely one. I see more than anyone how hard she works. She's been working to build cancer services for children in Gaza for 10 years. And since this genocide began on October 7th, her dedication day and night, she stays up till 2 o'clock in the morning every night trying to coordinate kids with cancer from Gaza to get out, and how hard that's been. But she's gotten over 90 of those children out. That's a huge, huge accomplishment. And that's testament to her dedication, her capabilities, and her knowledge of the field that she works in. So yeah, I think her story hasn't been told much. So I always feel that people should hear that as well. She's not Palestinian; she's a Sudanese American, but she, like myself, is very much dedicated to the cause and to the people there.
Yeah, just so you know, that the podcast, the objective is to really empower, amplify um, anyone from any marginalized group, not just Palestinians and their allies. So we would definitely welcome to have her on. So can you just talk to me a little bit more about your childhood? Because I read somewhere where and you mentioned it too, your dad was a teacher, but he was also a social justice advocate, right? And you experienced some hardship because of that. Could you just kind of walk us through that?
Yeah, so it's interesting because my father was born in this poor South and was raised, in at a time when race relations, Jim Crow was still very much part of American society. The lack of equality for our African American brothers and sisters was part of, as it is today, but much worse back when my father was growing up in North Carolina and then moved to Akron, Ohio, for economic reasons. Would come across as being the last person you might think of who would take on the issue of race relations in our country from a social justice point of view. But he did, and kind of contrary to his background and to his family history, and worked for desegregating housing in areas where African Americans were not able to purchase property. We lived in a town that was all white, and African Americans could not purchase property there. And my father very much believed that was an injustice, as it was, and worked against it. And as a result, we had our house shot at, and we actually had to move from that town simply because we had 5 kids that my father wanted to protect. Nonetheless, he always continued to work for social justice, as did my mom, and I think that's what instilled some sense of supporting people like the Palestinians at an early age. In addition to that, I grew up in a small town in Ohio called Kent, and in 1970 there was an incident at our university in which the National Guard killed 4 unarmed students protesting the American invasion of Cambodia. So, having grown up in a small town with that legacy, I think, was more exposed to social justice issues than Americans from other similar backgrounds. And as a result, when the first Intifada began in 1988, when I was a student of international relations and political science at Kent State, it kind of resonated with me more than probably other students or other Americans my age, simply because of that background of both my parents and the small town I grew up in. And all, the scenes of young Palestinians being shot and injured by armed soldiers was very similar to what we saw at Kent State on that bloody afternoon of May 4th, 1970. So, I was very much, open to the idea of trying to understand what was happening and why, and having, studying international relations and political science, I very much kind of dove into trying to understand this issue from a historical and a political point of view. And that's when, my eyes really opened to what the root cause of this conflict was, and, feeling very much on the side of the Palestinians, simply because I believe, until their basic core issues of inequality and a lack of political sovereignty and national sovereignty on their land, there will not be an end to this conflict. And I think everybody understands that.
Were you treated differently in grade school or high school because of the work that your father was doing at all?
No, not really. I mean, the small town we grew up in was very progressive because of the university. So most of the kids I was friends with were um, you know, s- children of professors, and it was probably a pretty liberal environment. So no, I mean, and we were just kids. Like when our house was shot at, I was 3 or 4 years old. So it really wasn't something that I was aware of at the time or even can remember. But growing up, when we moved to a more progressive environment, no, I think most of the students and most of the people that I grew up with were like-minded, and their families were very like-minded as well.
Just curious, did your father or your mother introduce any historical figures to sort of educate you on social justice, or did you just pick that up sort of on your own as well with your own reading? I ask because I think one of your heroes, if I'm not mistaken, I hope hero is okay to say, is Malcolm X.
I picked him up on my own. I mean, I love to read, and his autobiography when I was probably 15, 16, I read it twice, and it very much resonated with me. Although, I'm a white kid from a small town in Ohio, but he was a self-made man, and he My parents got divorced when I was 13, and that left a big scar on me. And so I felt that I had to kind of try to find ways to identify with people who were self-made and were taking responsibility for their own life. And Malcolm X was certainly a man like that, and a very powerful, very charismatic, great American leader. Now, my parents were more of the Martin Luther King, Gandhi type of American or historical leaders for social justice, and I love and respect them as well. But I think Malcolm was more of a truth teller, and very powerful in the way that he expressed his views, as flawed as sometimes they were. And so he was somebody who I very much admired as a young man growing up, and respected very much his voice and his ability to express himself.
I know you ended up in journalism, but when you were in high school, did you know what you wanted to do? Was there a certain direction you wanted to go into, or when did that sort of click for you?
So that was a crisis even in my university years, because I knew what I didn't want to do. I did not want to be complacent. I did not want to be part of a kind of a corporate system. I was never really interested in like material things. I did know that I wanted to have a life of purpose, and that this was an opportunity for me to, um, when you're young, if you can kind of find your way along a course that you feel gives meaning and purpose to your life. And I was very idealistic in that regard. I didn't know what that was. And even when I finished university, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And that's when I took a chance and decided to go back to Palestine and to start writing as a journalist. I never went to journalism school, but to just go and try to, I like to write, and just to become somebody who could try to share stories and kind of expose Americans to what was happening on the ground there. I did that at a very young age, or at least right out of university. And that was just something I said, you know what, at this age, I don't have a family, I don't have real responsibility, I don't need much to survive. So that's how I just kind of made that decision to just um, go to Palestine, and just trying to jump into being part of what was happening on the ground there during the first Intifada. And it was just an amazing experience. It was life changing, of course. And so I no, but I never knew, and it was a crisis. I mean, I was very fortunate as a young man. I was very idealistic, and I hope I still retain some of that. In that, my mom worked for United Airlines, and I was able to fly for free because at that time I was her dependent, even at university. So I decided to take a semester off of college because I didn't really know what I wanted to do in my life, and instead of just keep going through college, I wanted to kind of try to have some kind of reflection and kind of spiritual connection to, kind of review of where you're going and what you want to do in your life. So I got to fly. My mom said, choose wherever you want to go, take a semester off school, save your money, because I worked all through high school and all through college, save your money and just go somewhere, and and just try to find yourself. And I think that's important for young people to do that. So I flew to New Zealand, and I just got off the plane. I didn't know anybody, and I just hitchhiked through the country for 6 weeks, and that was in winter break of, I think, 1987 or something like that, and it just changed my life. I mean, there was just total freedom. I was at the end of the world. There was no internet. Nobody knew where I was. I could go anywhere I wanted every day. The country's extremely beautiful. The people are very nice and hospitable, and it was just an amazing experience of total absolute freedom, but also giving me space to like just recalibrate, or at least kind of reflect on where I wanted to go and the kind of person I wanted to be. And I can remember one moment, in that whole process of, I'd run out of money. I was at the end of my trip. I was sleeping on a beach. I didn't even have money to stay in the youth hostel. And I just told myself, this is the life I want to live. I want to be somebody who always doesn't shy away from adventure and experiencing the world and people, but also I wanted to do something that gave my life meaning and purpose. So trying to find both of those together, I guess, was kind of Palestine became kind of a natural direction for me to head to, although I didn't know that at the time.
Yeah. So you've gone through a lot of trials and tribulations in your life, and where you're comfortable, we'll touch upon those. But one of those, I believe, is obviously the divorce of your parents.
Yeah.
How did that shape you? What was your reaction to that?
It was hard. I mean, my father was very angry. My mom was a little bit lost. I mean, I love both of them, and I'm not. God, my mom, God rest her soul, passed away a few years ago. My father is still alive, and they're both great people. But they were consumed with their lives, and I don't blame them for that. But I was kind of left alone, as my sisters were as well. In that, not in the sense that we always had the basics taken care of. We had a roof over our head. We had food. Our parents loved us, but on Friday night they didn't know where I was, and on Saturday night they didn't know where I was or what I was doing, and that's fine. That made me very independent, and I appreciate that. That made me. I look back with no regrets at all. But it hurt, and I remember my father was so angry. None of my sisters wanted to go live with him, and he wasn't an easy person to live with. Today he's a teddy bear, and I love him very much. But back then he was angry, and but I decided to go live with him. I didn't want him to live alone, and I look back at that now, at that young age of just being 14 years old, and making that decision that you know that I was willing to go and kind of endure some of the hard environment that he was creating around him, because I didn't want my father to live by himself at that time. So, I always had a sense of empathy in that regard, and it turns out, that hopefully it's made me a better person in my life.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Wow, that's powerful. Did you get to any kind of trouble in school or any issues like that? Were you a partier?
I was. I mean, I was never a serious student. I always had this kind of fatalistic attitude about life. I remember in high school, it was during the height of the Cold War, and it was all this rhetoric about us nuking them and them nuking us, and I just always said, I'm not gonna, this world's not going to last till why should I care about being serious about school when we're all going to die in a nuclear holocaust anyways. I mean, that was kind of crazy to think like that, but that's just the way I kind of like made an excuse for not ever really trying to apply myself or be serious until the end, until I realized, because I was always working, and I always had a manual labor job, a hard one. I was a landscaper through college to pay my way through, and even at the end of high school. And I said, you know what? I love being outdoors. I love physical labor, but I don't want to do this when I'm 50 years old or 40 years old. So then I decided I'm going to apply myself and see, if I could use my brains, because, I wasn't stupid. I just was not focused on trying to get good grades. I wasn't a troublemaker, but I was pretty wild, um, not necessarily in a bad way. I never, but in the sense that I like to have fun, and I like to be, I like to push. What do you say? Push the envelope as far as possible. When you're 17, 18 years old, 19 years old, that's not uncommon.
Yeah.
But I look back, I loved it. It was a great time, and it was with my friends and with life. And I wish I'd applied myself a little bit more in college, but or in high school. Not in college, I was okay, but I think it worked out. So I'm no
Did,
regret.
did you did you play any sports or anything when you were in school?
I still play baseball in Ohio in the summer.
Oh,
But yeah, I played high school baseball up until my junior year. To my senior year, I didn't play my senior because I had to get a job to pay for college. So it was either like go to college or play a sport that at that time I wasn't very good at. So I decided just focus on trying to pay my tuition through college, which I was smart to do that because my parents didn't have the money to do it.
and what kind of work were you doing?
Landscaping. I was planting trees, digging up sod, spreading mulch, pulling out bushes, doing railroad ties in the hot summer with creosote. I worked for some really nice guys, but they were very hardworking. They never took lunch breaks. So, um, and it was great. I mean, it was great in the sense that when I think if you go through that period at a young age, that you have to really work hard, and for a little amount of money, you develop a work ethic and a certain sense of discipline that is important at a young age to develop that, but also an appreciation for I think education and trying to get out of that, because again, your body doesn't hold up necessarily as you get older doing railroad ties every single day, or pulling out with a spade a big tree that's been dead. And so in that sense, I appreciate that period of my life as well, and I'm very proud that I paid my way through college. I mean, that's can't do it today. I think the tuitions are too high, but back then I think at Kent State it was 3,200 a semester, something like that, which wasn't easy to raise
Wow.
that money making minimum wage, but I was able to do it.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think maybe that's where you picked up some of your work ethic, obviously, because
Yeah.
I was telling my wife, I don't believe that you sleep at all. I believe that you're on 24/7. It's
I mean, I try to. It's a little bit better now because my wife, um, is very we try to develop some space for ourselves and our family. I'm not allowed to have the phone next to the bed, which I think is a good choice. But now she's working more than I do because of her responsibility with cancer kids in Gaza. So both of us, do a lot of work. But I think at this time, with this current crisis in Gaza in particular, I think we can kind of put aside those um, previous rules and just focus on whatever we can do to help people.
Yeah, no, and we appreciate that, of course. So just to transition a little bit into college, did you jump straight to Kent State? Did you go to community college or a junior college first?
No, but I went to Kent State on probation. I don't think I've ever said that before. 'Cause I wasn't a good student, like I said that already, and it wasn't because it's just because I didn't apply myself, and my parents didn't care. I don't think they ever checked my grades, anything like that. And so Kent State's it's a state school. It's not a great academic school, although it has some. College is what you make out of it. So you can go anywhere. You can go to some of the best schools in the world. If you're not a serious student, it really doesn't matter. And you can go to you can go to community college, and if you really work hard, and apply yourself, you can attain a certain level of academic skills and opportunities that because of your efforts that would pay off. But no, I went straight to Kent State and started thinking seriously about being a student, and I loved it. I just loved starting. I loved the experience of college and the intellectualism, and I took philosophy classes and really loved those. And so I was very much a liberal arts student. I'm not somebody who has a hard science background, and my wife, meanwhile, is a pediatric oncologist. So we always have these kind of personality clashes between my liberal arts kind of background and her hard sciences.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. I can appreciate that. So what was your major in college, by the way?
International relations.
International relations. Okay.
So that's
And
political science with a language. And I didn't realize I took Russian, and I didn't realize how hard that was. I mean, I should have known. Um, but I thought it would be, I had a dream of maybe kind of going to get a master's degree and think about, doing something in the government. But the older I got along that course, I just became less and less disenfranchised with U.S. foreign policy and not wanting to be a part of that.
well, I think all of us Palestinians will thank you for not doing that and coming on the right side.
I wouldn't have got very far. So
Yeah.
I'm glad I didn't do that either.
So what point did you pivot and go to, because it was in your college years, during your college years where you went to Palestine, correct? Was it your junior year?
It was my junior year. It was winter
Yeah.
break of my junior year. So I'll just tell you how I got. I mean, the first Intifada began, and first I just started to really read a lot about the history of the Middle East and the current politics, and it didn't take much to kind of come to the conclusion as to what the root cause was, as I mentioned earlier. And yet, the way the Palestinian issue is being portrayed, even at a university level, where there's supposed to be kind of free exchange of ideas and kind of less filtered propaganda, as we saw in the media and in kind of the politics of our country, even back in the 80s when the internet wasn't around to kind of give an alternative view. I realized that what people were hearing and what was being said was completely contrary to what the reality was. So I wrote an article. I wrote an op-ed for the school newspaper, and I'd never done that before, and I don't even remember how I did it. But I think it was in October of 1988 when the Israeli elections were taking place, and it was the end of the first year of the First Uprising. And I just wrote how this election in Israel was going to be kind of a litmus test or a clear vision as to which direction they wanted to go, because the Palestinians had made it clear they were no longer willing to live under occupation. So it was up to the Israelis now to determine, were they going to they were going to continue with the occupation, or were they going to find some path forward with peace? So I wrote that on the school paper, and it was basically Palestinians, this was Israel's at a crossroads. Are they going to choose peace? Or are they going to choose occupation? And they chose occupation. And I wrote that, and then I never met a Palestinian in my life. I don't even think I knew any Arabs at that point in my life. And when I wrote that, a bunch of students contacted me who are mainly grad students from Palestine and from other Arab countries who are, very proud and empowered by their uprising. And, it was the first time Palestinians had really taken control of kind of their political narrative, their historical responsibility to liberate themselves. They weren't waiting for Egypt or Jordan or Syria to do it with their armies. They weren't waiting for the PLO to do it from Tunis. It was people on the ground, young people in particular, who were taking this responsibility. So all these students were very proud, and they were like, who's this American guy who just wrote this article in the school newspaper supporting us? So they sought me out and they found me. And we decided, I'm an activist. I believe strongly that you have to do more than just talk. And so we started, trying to educate our fellow students and bringing them to bringing speakers and set up stands at the student center during lunchtime that we would show videos from the Intifada or hand out pamphlets about the history of the Palestinian issue. And then I was chosen somehow. I think somebody nominated me from one of those students. The ADC, the Arab American Anti-Discrimination Committee, had a program back in the first Intifada, the first few years of the first Intifada, called Eyewitness Israel. And they were putting delegations together to go to the West Bank and Gaza and to just kind of tour around and see what was happening during that first year of the uprising. So they had done, I think, delegation of clergymen. They'd done a delegation of journalists. They'd done a delegation of congressional aides. And somehow they got around to university activists. And I just got selected somehow, and was able to go in December of 1988 during the winter break and spent 3 weeks in the West Bank and Gaza, living with families in the West Bank and Gaza, and meeting with human rights workers, meeting with doctors, going to the hospitals, visiting refugee camps, seeing settlements, and just having an incredible life-changing experience. And that's when I came back from that and was really motivated to share my experiences. And interestingly enough, I had a class right when I came back. I came back like a day before the school started, and had a class called History of the Middle East, and it was taught by a professor who was extremely right-wing Zionist. And these were all just American kids in the class. I mean, Kent State's got kids from farms all over Ohio, and would just kind of give, and they didn't know much. They were good kids, but they just didn't know. And he would just give these kind of really one-sided, false kind of uh, perspective on the Israel, on Palestine, on the Middle East in general. And it was, a lot of it was kind of racist against Arabs and Muslims, and all of it was, a lot of it was half truths and false. And I was pretty, at that point, I'd read a lot and I was pretty well educated. And I just come back from 3 weeks in the West Bank, so I knew more than he did about what was going on, and argued with him every day. I would just be like, no, that's not right. No, that's not right. Why don't you mention this? How about this? And we would have a debate every single day in class. And he was unable to teach his history of the Middle East, and that's fine because he wasn't teaching the truth. And finally, he just said, listen, if you, I know you just came back. I'm going to let you do a presentation about what you saw, and if I let you do that, will you let me teach the class? And I'm like, yeah, if you tell the truth, for sure. So we had back then you have like these trays with slides. This is not like today with PowerPoint. So back then I put together a slide presentation with all these pictures of their camps and X-rays with kids with bullets in the head, and settlements and things like that, just to go through and kind of show the students that, hey, I just came back. Here's what I saw. And as I was coming up the day to do the presentation, the nephew of the professor, who was a student in the class, took that tray, I was just coming up the steps to the third floor to kind of go into the classroom. And he just saw me, he was waiting for him, and he didn't want me to do the presentation. So he took the tray out of my hand and smashed it on the floor. Um, and, and the school newspaper at that time turned it into kind of like, well, me just even speaking about this issue from anything that was other than the usual kind of pro-Israel point of view was offensive. And that's why he acted the way he did. And I just remember thinking, wow, if they're going to I didn't do anything. I didn't even give a chance to speak. I'm at a university. You should be able to say whatever you want. Um, and the fact that the newspaper was twisting it, and that the professor's nephew felt empowered enough to kind of attack me and do that, I realized, well, this is not an easy issue. If you're going to go into it and you're going to kind of dedicate yourself to it, you have to be prepared to be attacked and to be, kind of defamed in the media, or what, just in general. People are always going to kind of take your motivations and turn it into something other than it is, other than what it is. And then I decided, I don't care. Like, that's what my heroes have done their whole lives. That they've done it, and, it's much more risk than I could ever have. And whether it was Malcolm X or Gandhi or ML King or others, my great heroes that I grew up with, admiring and reading, they always had they always had to make the same choice in their life, whether stay quiet and just kind of get through, safely and easily, or speak the truth to power and to take whatever risks come your way. So I just said, I'm fine. I didn't have any ambition to do anything, in the kind of establishment anyways. I knew I wasn't going to go into a grad school. I wasn't going to go into government. I wasn't going to do anything. I thought about that, but at some point I just said, after coming back from Palestine, I said, I'm not going to. I'm going to dedicate myself to something more effective on the ground that would actually help people. So I made that decision right after being attacked, and haven't looked back since.
Did he physically attack you, or did he just hit you? I mean, what was your
Well,
reaction?
my reaction was to punch him. I'm not much of a fighter, but I mean, I was kind of caught off guard. He just kind of took it out of my hands and smashed it. And so we had a little bit of fight. I knocked him down. I think that's the last fight I've ever had, and it might have been the first one. But in any case, yeah, I mean, in hindsight, I wish I would have. I'm a little bit bigger now, so maybe I would have dealt with it a little bit more effectively. But I got one good lick in, and then people broke it up, and then it's like after that, I was just like, okay, so this is what it is. This is what, people feel that they can stop you at a university from just going and speaking about an experience you had to students. And if they feel that emboldened, you're doing the right thing, because I wasn't saying anything contrary to other than, hey, this is what I saw. These are the people I met. This is what my perception is. And if you have a different point of view, let's hear it, and we can debate it. We can discuss it. Maybe you'll change my mind. Maybe I'll change yours. But in any case, we're at a university, and that's we're supposed to be able to express those views for free, openly. And instead, he chose violence, and that, like I said, that kind of showed me a lot of what I was getting myself into.
And sad to say that not much has changed, right? In universities, I believe. I think the same treatment still occurs. If they can't beat you with intellect, they do attack you, or now they dox you,
Yeah.
or spread rumors about you, right, to an extent. And especially if you're Palestinian, right, in the diaspora specifically, they're going to mistreat you one way or another. So it's unfortunate that we're still living that.
Well, it's a sign that, look, if you're at a university or in any walk of life, you should be able to have a free exchange of views, and especially at a university. And if you can't defend the occupation, you can't defend your point of view, your perspective, your ideology, intellectually, and you have to resort to denying the other person a voice or the opportunity to speak freely about their perspective, then that means you don't have truth on your side. If you have truth on your side, then present it, and your side will be stronger and you will prevail. I think what we all know, and we've all seen it very clearly, is that the Palestinian position at this point is one that is embraced by anybody who is objective and openly minded from a moral and principled and legal point of view. What's happening in Palestine is indefensible. And I think everybody knows that. And that's why they're resorting to these measures of trying to silence people from speaking out. Because there may be people who are anti-Jewish or anti-Semitic, but I haven't seen that to the extent that we've seen anti-Islamic and anti-Arab sentiments being expressed from the other side.
I would actually go a step further and say anti-Palestinian, right? Because I do believe there are members of the Arab community, as an example, that are anti-Palestinian as well.
Oh,
To an extent.
for sure.
Yeah.
But I think, honestly, among the Arabs, I don't see it much being anti-Palestinian. I think a lot of it is more kind of on the government level. So you see it among some of the governments in the Gulf and some of the other Arab countries where they don't really want Palestinians in their country. They see the Palestinians with their continued insistence on their rights to be a hindrance to kind of normalizing the region.
Yep.
And I think that's where some of the anti-Palestinianism stems from. But my experience, having traveled all over the Middle East, doing work for Palestine, is I very rarely find anybody who expresses anything but respect, admiration, and support from the Arab population, and now non-Arab population, with complete sincerity and affection.
And I think that's clear. If you see the protests and everything going on, I think the majority of citizens of these countries are definitely pro-Palestinian, and their hearts are with us. You're right. I think it's more on the government level, for sure. So and I want to get into your experience when you moved to Palestine for a period of time, but right now, what piece of advice would you give to any college students or anybody entering the workforce? Because right now, people are still being silenced. They're scared to speak up.
Yeah.
They're afraid that they're going to end up on some website somehow. What advice would you give them?
Gosh, I've heard that question a lot, and I'm very fortunate that even though when I was at the university in the late 80s in the first Intifada, it was a very, tense time and a very, difficult time. It's not anything like today, because the tools that are available to, as you mentioned, dox and try to ban people or cancel them or whatever you want to call it, they're much more effective now because there's no accountability. You can just put someone's name, address, face on a website, and suddenly you have a whole world against you. But my advice is, first and foremost, is you don't want to work, in my opinion, for a corporation that doesn't stand on the side of justice and freedom. You don't want to go into a profession in which you can't be honest and open about something as basic as people living equal on the same land. And I think you need to, I think people, young people in particular, and they don't need my advice, they're doing it already. Be true to your principles. I mean, what's happening in Palestine today it's a historical litmus test, because we're going to be at a point one day when we look back and we're going to have to be accountable for what we did, what we're doing right now today. And all of us, whether you're just finishing your university or you're working in some high corporate job or whatever, all of us are going to have to one day be accountable to what we're doing. And you want to be able to say, I stood on the side of justice. I was against genocide. Those 13,000 children who were killed by the bombs that came from the United States, I stood with them. I did not silence my voice out of my own personal interest. And I think you'll be able to sleep a lot better at night if that's the case. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to go out and constantly, you know, com- be controversial online or in the different platforms that are available. I think because we have have such a strong position from a legal point of view, from a moral point of view, that we don't need to resort to the kind of language or position that might get you to be in trouble, get you in a position of trouble. We have so many ways of expressing our side today with the killing of so many children, the starvation that's going on, the daily uh, tools of oppression, which is unimaginable in a modern world, a civilized world. Just show those, just connect with people on a human level. That's what I believed from day one, of why I went back to Palestine after my first trip to work as a journalist. I wanted to humanize the Palestinians, and you don't need to resort to UN resolutions or the Balfour Declaration. All those things can come later. You're just going to get a glassy-eyed response from people. Just show them the lives of the people in Gaza, the children in Gaza that are being destroyed, and you'll find a huge amount of people, unless they're so completely one-sided and there's no ability to reach them, and that's fine. You don't have to reach everybody. There's a whole vast majority of people out there that don't know anything about this issue, and just put it in the context of, you're a human being. How would you live? How would you feel if this was your family, if this was your country, if you had lost everything, if you had been living under occupation since 1967, if you had been a refugee, and so on and so forth, just in the context so people can understand it from a human point of view, and then show them. And that doesn't mean you have to discount what the other side has gone through. Is true, is what they've also suffered. They've also endured hardships. They've also gone through these experiences. Um, but none of it justifies what's happening today in Gaza. And a lot of it could be avoided had there been different decisions made on a leadership level in the past that would have brought a resolution of this conflict years ago and generations ago. So my advice is just stay strong, be honest, don't give in, but don't resort to language or to uh, any kind of interaction that is hostile or aggressive or in any form, disparaging a collective group of people. Not every Israeli is anti-Palestinian, and we have a whole generation of young Jewish Americans who are on our side now. When I say our side, the side of peace and justice and freedom, and that's the entire the new generation of Americans, and on a global scale, are the vast majority of them are on our side. So let's tap into that. Those are our allies. Let's not alienate them with language that's not necessary or unacceptable or doesn't represent our values. And let's stay focused on what we can do to connect with them with these basic principles and these basic values that we all share: freedom, equality, peace, justice. that's what the Palestinian cause is all about. So always kind of convey that message in any way of communicating with anyone, and I think you'll be all right.
Yeah, that's a great piece of advice. Thank you. And I'll be sharing that with my kids as well. So, talk to me about when you lived in Palestine or when you really settled down. And I'm asking because when I would visit almost every summer. And I think I lived there for only 1 year when I was younger. But for the most part, me and my mom and my dad would go over there every summer, as you know, many Arab Americans do. I didn't always adjust well initially, right? Because it is a culture shock. It's a little bit different. How did you adjust and how were you treated when you first got there?
So I was very idealistic and very much just there to learn and to experience what life was like and to learn the culture. And um, so it was an amazing time. The first Intifada was just an incredible time of hope and resilience on the part of the Palestinians. And I was just starting to develop so many friendships among so many people, both Palestinians who were living there and a lot of international people who are working there, and young people coming for different reasons, as journalists, as humanitarian aid workers, as people just kind of trying to find themselves. And we just connect, and it was at a time when you could travel easily around the country. There weren't checkpoints. There wasn't the kind of institutionalized control that there exists today. There was no internet. So if you wanted to reach someone, you'd had to find a phone somewhere. There were no cell phones. You'd have to find a way to reach them and communicate. So it was a different kind of life, but it was really, really powerful and very. I very much look back on that as one of the major turning points in my life was being in Palestine during 1990, 91, 92, and just having that privilege of being part of that period of Palestinian history and world history. And the privilege of just having so many great friends there and having so many crazy and amazing experiences on the ground.
Where did you live, out of curiosity?
So I would live in the old city of Jerusalem,
Hmm.
or in Jerusalem itself. Jerusalem was not cut off like it is today. So it was the centerpiece of Palestinian life. So that was, and now all that's moved to Ramallah for the most part. But at that time, East Jerusalem was the place. So I'd stay on the Mount of Olives. It was one of those wherever you could find a couch type situation, or some friends and I would get a small apartment in the old city, and it was great. So Jerusalem at that time was different than it is today. Now it's kind of being strangled with the closure of the borders from the West Bank. So that traditional connection of West Bank Jerusalem is not as strong. It's almost non-existent today, as it, in contrary to the way it was back then.
Sounds like you felt at home with that community too.
I did. I mean, I think I adjust pretty well. I don't have a lot of hangups about, being the white American guy living in these places. I mean, of course, I'm conscious of, my privilege and the role that my government's playing in the oppression of these people. But I also know that, we're human beings, and I didn't choose to be born where I was. I don't choose the policy of my government. I do share responsibility, but I don't think a personal responsibility. And therefore, I think if you treat people with kindness and you're truly an ally to what they're going through, and you're not there for any reason other than to try to help and learn, um, Palestinians are the most open minded of people coming in for that purpose. It doesn't matter if you're American or from anywhere in the world. If you're a respectful person to their culture and to their cause, you're a friend, and you can make friends very easily.
No, absolutely. Were you harassed at all by anybody on the Israeli side during your period there? And maybe if you don't want to answer that, you can say that too. But I'm just curious.
No, it doesn't bother me. Not really. I mean, honestly, look, being a white American guy, you fly under the radar with the Israelis quite a bit, at that time in particular. And they're, like I said before, technology wasn't as powerful as it is today. So, it wasn't as easy to control people as it is today using face recognition and, computers that are, connected with people's IDs and their entire history. Social media, calling up your Facebook or whatever it is and seeing how you're expressing yourself politically, that didn't exist back then. And whenever Israeli soldiers would see me, on the streets, or if I came I was there as an American guy, and they would always see it wasn't even possible for them to comprehend that I might be there, to on the Palestinian side. So you could
Mm.
fly under the radar that way quite a bit. Now, people of color. I had a guy who worked for me who was an African American, Mike, and he would come with me to Palestine, and it was funny because we'd always walk down the street together, and in Jerusalem, and the soldiers would always stop him, and they would never stop me. And we used to laugh about it. It wasn't really that funny, but I mean, it was just like, uh, it was just it was a tell of, this was all complete profiling. And he was didn't know as much about the issue as I did. He was kind of learning it as he went along, but he was starting to experience it that firsthand. Here's two Americans walking down the street, one's black, one's white. The black guy gets stopped every single time by the Israeli soldiers, asking for his ID. What are you doing here? Where's your visa? That kind of stuff.
It's hard for people to believe when I explain that to them, and I sometimes I challenge them. Come with me one time, and you'll see the second I get to Tel Aviv, because I have I'm an American citizen, obviously, right? They'll pull me off the airplane right away, almost,
Yeah.
and they'll give the other person a completely different treatment, right? Two different lines, essentially. It's hard for people to really believe that is happening today.
I mean, I'm kind of a weird. I have a weird experience because now I carry a Palestinian passport, and so when I land at Tel Aviv, because you're allowed to enter Tel Aviv now on your Palestinian passport, the disbelief and the confusion of on the part of the Israelis, although, especially when they don't stop me off the plane, unless they know I'm coming, or something like that. But the idea that an American guy named Steve would have a Palestinian passport is just incomprehensible to them, and they don't understand it, and until they look at it on their computer. But it's especially interesting when I leave through the bridge, because you have to pass through Palestinian, Israeli, and Jordanian passport control within like a 1 hour period of time, and it's always a different reaction. Which is that when I leave the bridge and get my passport stamped by the Palestinians, they're very happy to see an American guy with a Palestinian passport. I'm one of them. I'm on the bus with the Palestinians. I'm stopped at a checkpoint when waiting for hours while the foreign guys on the foreign bus zip right through, and then I get to the Israeli side, and they're confused and don't understand exactly why it is. And then the Jordanians are not always happy to see. They get a little angry sometimes as to why are you carrying a Palestinian passport, which is weird. Like, why does anybody care? But it's always interesting to see you have three stages of three different countries all kind of seeing you as a white American guy with a Palestinian passport, and all their reactions are so completely different that it's just an interesting kind of test of how different people see the Palestinians.
Yeah, no, for sure. So during your time in Palestine, you met a young man, if I'm not mistaken, that would change your life forever, essentially, correct? And one of the reasons, I think it was one of the first young men that you helped, I believe, if that's correct.
Which one are you talking about? I've met so many.
No, your very first one, I think somebody there, if I remember listening to one of your stories, there was a young man that you met for the first time that was injured, and you made a decision I think you worked with your sister possibly to get that person help.
Yeah, that was a boy, actually. He's only 10 years old. His
Okay.
name was Mansour Nini from Hebron. And
Okay.
yeah, when I was working as a journalist, I heard about this boy who had lost both his legs and a hand and an eye from a bombing of his home in Hebron. And he was at the Maqasid Hospital, which is on the Mount of Olives. And I just went up to visit him and to see him in the hospital. And uh, just kind of did a story about him, but also befriended him. We kind of had a connection, even though I didn't speak Arabic and he didn't speak English. And I kind of realized, well, you know what? You kind of have to do more than just do a story for this kid. He's in a wheelchair, and he was really cute, and he had a great spirit and a great, sense of humor. He's very, he was clever. And so I had gone back to Ohio at that time I would work in Palestine during the winter, and then go back to save money in Ohio as a landscaper. It's a seasonal job there because of winter. And so I went back, I'd run out of money, and I went back to work in Ohio, and I took a photograph of this boy, and I said, I wanted to do something if I could help him get legs. He's missing both legs. So I showed it to a Lebanese orthopedic surgeon named Dr. Zuhair Yassin. He's since passed away in Akron. And, asked him, do you have any ideas how we could help this kid? And he did it all. Like, he arranged all the treatment for the boy. And he told me the next day, hey, just bring him over. Everything's arranged for free. So that was the first injured boy who ever came to the U.S. And that was in May of 1990. And it was a big deal. It was on the front page of the main newspapers in Cleveland and in Akron. He was on television. They did a lot of stories about him and his sister who came with him, who was injured. And I realized, that's what I wanted to do when I was a journalist. I wasn't trying to make a career out of journalism. I just was like trying to share the stories of the people I met on the ground there. And in addition to that, I really wanted to find ways to help encourage the Palestinian community outside to be involved more directly into serving their cause without having to just be donors to the PLO or whatever. I thought that, there's much more the Palestinian community can do than what they're being asked to do right now. So that's something that, by housing these kids and taking care of them in the Cleveland community, that demonstrated that there was a huge opportunity for the Palestinian community outside to do much more than they had been asked to do. And they were starving for that opportunity, just like they are today. And then for me, it was, something I wanted to do more. I wanted to have a more effective contribution to the Palestinian struggle than I had had as a writer or as an activist. And getting this kid out and getting him treatment, getting him new legs, sending him back to his family, walking again and healed as much as one can be from such an experience. That was something that made me feel better as a human being, and made me feel like I had a greater purpose. And then when he went back, people came to me with other kids. They heard about his trip, and came to me with other injured children. And I just started placing them in American hospitals and finding treatment for free, and realized that it was something that could be a nice program to help Palestine. And so I started doing that, and realized I needed an organization to continue, because I'd went around actually to all of the organizations, Palestinian organizations and Arab American organizations in Washington. And I asked them, hey, would you guys sponsor kids coming from Palestine if I arranged their treatment for free? We just need plane tickets for those kids. And I couldn't get anyone to bite on it. And so I decided, well, I'll do it then. So that's how I started PCRF back in 1991. And with my sister registering us as a tax exempt 501c3, and that's how we started. And since then, it's been pretty impressive growth of that organization.
But you didn't think PCRF was going to exist for the first few months, or maybe for the first year that you were doing this. This wasn't meant to be a huge project, right? Is that accurate?
Yeah, I mean, I was hoping it wouldn't turn into something like that, because you're hoping that there wouldn't be a need for bringing injured children out for medical care, because you were hoped that the conflict would be resolved to the extent that 10-year-old boys aren't having their legs blown off, and that political leaders would find a solution in by the time we're in the 20th century, to resolve conflict through negotiations and diplomacy, and not through killing each other. But of course, that's not happened, as we all know. So the intention was, okay, this is just something I'm going to do for now to serve the Palestinian people. And then it just grew, and it took off, and I met my first wife, and she became such a major part of the organization and building it. But no, I didn't envision it for something I would do the rest of my life. I thought it was just something, way to serve these people until this conflict resided. In the first year, we had many experiences. I remember we had like 5 or 6 injured kids with me in Ohio that were living with me. And we had our electricity turned off. We had, we were nearly evicted out of the home we were staying in, because we didn't have money to even pay for anything. So it was very difficult. And that's, many times I decided I was going to just give it up, because I was like, well, if the Palestinians aren't going to support this, then it's not going to succeed. But it just took a while to win the trust. And, when the internet came into play in the mid 90s, we were able to communicate to a larger group of people and start sharing the work that we're doing, and people wanted to get involved and help out. And that helped a lot.
Yeah, it sounds like you faced a lot of roadblocks and a lot of failure almost, which I think is important for people to hear. This is not something that was easy to put together
No,
or get done.
no, the stories are, I have so many of failure and hardship. And, I always, like I said, I had a work ethic. So, and my first wife, God rest her soul, came from the West Bank, and she was a very hardworking woman. When I met her, she had 3 jobs, and so we just dedicated ourselves to building the organization, and going wherever we could. We were sleeping in hospitals with the kids we were bringing, really sacrificing, but with pleasure. When it was when you're young, you can do that, and we hadn't kids yet, so it was an amazing time, to kind of do something that was so, um, you know, idealistic, but also seeing the impact and empowering our community. I think people really wanted to be involved in this, so the organization just kind of slowly grew, and then it just took off, and very proud of that.
Yeah. And your first wife had, she was a social worker. Is that correct?
Yeah, so she was teaching social work at Al-Quds University in Jerusalem,
Okay.
and then she was um, became social worker for PCRF, and we were a team. So she would, when we were bringing kids out for treatment, she would take care of them and the host families and their families back in Palestine and the kids themselves. And then I would take care of the other aspects of building the organization. And together we were able to get hundreds of kids out and started doing so many other things as well. But it was her hard work, and she was very charismatic person. Everybody loved her. She was very intelligent, very kind, very funny, very smart. And to marry an American guy as a Palestinian woman from the West Bank she was really the first one in the West Bank to kind of take that risk. And that just shows you how strong of a person she was. Person.
I gotta ask you, because every Palestinian guy is probably wondering this. Did you have to go to the family and ask for her hand and go
Course,
through the tradition? Yeah.
of
How
course.
did that go?
It was good. So her mom passed when she was 12. So her father um, was the guy. The first thing is she has 5 brothers, so I went to the brothers first. But she had kind of, smoothed the way for me. She had made sure that they were going to say yes. So it wasn't really, it was just kind of a formality more than a risk on my part. Um, and, but I think she was 29, and I was 26. So she was 3 years older than me, but for some way she wasn't married yet. And I think that had to do with her wanting to marry out of love and not out of kind of arrangement or just to settle. So
Yeah.
she wasn't going to settle, and then we fell in love, and she was happy, and so she went to her family and basically said, "This is what I'm going to do." And he'll respect the culture. He's going to respect our religion. He's going to do everything that would not bring any shame or embarrassment on us in the community. But we're going to get married, and the family agreed, and her father agreed, and I respect them and appreciate that.
Yeah. And speaking of a hardship and the challenges that you faced again with the divorce of your parents and then the death of your first wife, I think if I remember correctly, you all visited a hospital. You're with your kids at a playground, and she went to get tested or checked up, I guess.
Yes,
And she, yeah.
this was in 2008. She had been sick for about a month. Sorry to cut you off, but
Hmm.
so she had been not feeling well, and we just didn't know what it was. She just thought she had a virus of some kind. Whatever medication she took never really helped. And then we were in Dubai with 6 amputees. We were working to get kids treated there, and she went to get a blood test because we were in a hospital, and it came back that she had leukemia, and then so we went to another hospital to ask to get a better test because it was a small. We were at the Emirati hospital, and then we went to the American hospital, which was much bigger, and they actually had an oncologist there, and they did the blood work on her again, and they said, "Yeah, you have leukemia." And we didn't really know what leukemia was back then, and just flew back to Cleveland as quickly as we could. And we had 2 daughters, 12-year-old and a 2-year-old. And 6 months later, I mean, she just couldn't. She had the best treatment possible, but she had AML, which is the most aggressive form of leukemia, and it took her life. So that was in July 15th of 2009.
Yeah. I'm sorry to hear that, and I'm sorry for your kids too. My mother died of cancer as well, so and it happened pretty quickly. And you've named a center after her. cancer center after her. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, one of the great initiatives, I wanted to find a way to honor her legacy, but also to do something that would help fill a significant gap in the health sector in Palestine. So we we decided to build a cancer department for children in the West Bank because there wasn't one. So those kids who have cancer, and there's hundreds of them, all of them had to go outside of the West Bank for treatment that was fragmented, was difficult to get, was expensive, and they were away from their families, and a lot of reasons that justified our campaign to build the department. And in 2013, after doing a lot of crowdfunding and events to raise the money, we opened the first cancer department, which still exists at the Beit Jala Hospital under her name. We're very proud of that. And it was, for me, the greatest achievement in my professional life was being able to honor her legacy by building the Hud Al Masri Pediatric Cancer Department.
Yeah, that's amazing. What was it like? Because you were a single father at that point, right? And raising two daughters. What was that like? What was that experience for you?
Raising the kids?
Yeah, on your own. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, it was hard. Obviously, I moved back to Palestine after my wife passed. Her family there helped a lot, and particularly her younger brother, but also others in her family who helped a lot to help me with my kids, my two daughters. And we promised my wife that we would raise our kids also as Palestinian. They were been Americanized enough, as every kid in the world is to some extent, with the prevalence of the culture and entertainment industry is so pervasive everywhere, that they had been Americanized, but they also were Palestinian. And so we moved back, and they went to school there, and I put all of my effort, my grief, into the work and the organization, and the organization really took off. That was the major change in the organization growing, was people hearing about her and our story as an American guy and a Palestinian woman, and what had happened. And it really resonated with people on a human level. And then so people started to follow us and try to support the work organization more, and it just became much bigger. But to answer your question, it was very hard because you never know how to deal with those circumstances. I had two daughters; they were young. They deserved more support as far as counseling and therapy than I was able to give them. I put my own grief into the work. So if I had things to do over, I would have probably tried to get them kind of more support for what they were going through. And it really didn't exist in the West Bank, but thank God they've turned out pretty good, and it's more to say about them than about me.
Well, no, I think they have a wonderful father, and obviously their mother spirits are strong. So
Yeah, definitely.
yeah. So what struggles, we go back to PCRF when you were creating it, and obviously you talked about trying to raise money and get support or whatever it may be. Did you get any pushback from other parties? You maybe read between the lines, any active sabotage that was occurring against you?
I don't know about sabotage, but I think people are always kind of suspicious as to why an American guy was so dedicated to the Palestinians. There was always at the beginning the whole like whispering of CIA, and I'm like, yeah, if you guys wish the CIA was doing this kind of work, and there was always that, because Palestinians are very suspicious for good reason, and so there was that, and then over time you earn through your work the trust and the respect of people if you deserve it. Um, so I never had any kind of real sabotage in the early years or even in the middle years where I felt anything but support. And that was mostly due to Huda. She was a very smart person and very strong. And I think she um, kept a lot of people out that had maybe had bad intentions. I'm a bit more trusting and a little bit more naive. And I'm not part of the culture that ingrained in the culture as she was, to be able to kind of like identify people that may not be coming in with the right intentions. My thing was always like, hey, we're a charity helping kids. Who would not want to do something good in that regard? But it turns out, it seems like there's a lot of people like that. So
Yeah. Do people still view you that way, or do you think now
no, I don't
people?
think I have that whole suspicion any longer among Palestinians. I think after 30 years, pretty much people either know who I am, or there's enough international people on the ground who are doing this similar kind of work, that it's kind of more commonplace than it was 30 years ago.
Got it. And how many years has PCRF existed at this point?
So I founded it in 1991. It got its official IRS registration in 92. So it's 32 years,
Okay, got it.
33.
And I have to ask the golden question: why did you leave PCRF?
Is that the golden question?
That's
Okay.
everybody. You know, when I let everybody know I was going to meet with you, the biggest thing was, why is he leaving? Why is he leaving? And then the question is, tell me about HEAL Palestine.
Sure. Well, why am I leaving? Why I left PCRF? There's a lot of reasons. I think with what started on October 7th requires a much broader vision and a much wider response. And I have 30 years plus of building, one of the most successful nonprofit organizations in the world, not only in Palestine. And I felt I was at a crossroads in my life professionally where I could do much more for the Palestinians than I was given the opportunity to do in PCRF. Not only from a leadership perspective, but from the scope of the work. I thought there are other areas that we could do in addition to health, not as a kind of zero sum game where you're taking something away from others to do work. We could continue to do the work in health, but take on education. We could continue to do the work in health and education and take on a wider scope of work in aid. We could continue to do the work in health, education, and aid, but also build a mentorship program to rebuild the lives of these thousands of children that are going through one of the most unimaginable experiences of violence and destruction that the modern world has ever seen. And, as I'm getting older in life, I want to make sure that I give all effort and all of whatever my experience and leadership skills are to meeting this moment and this challenge. And unfortunately, it came at a time when the organization didn't really give me that opportunity any longer. The board had decided to kind of remove me from a lot of the leadership roles, not because I couldn't do them, but other reasons. I'm not sure what they are. And maybe to make the organization more institutionalized or whatever. But for me, that wasn't acceptable. I have to, and it's not because I want to be a leader. I'm happy to work with any kind of organization in which we bring in the best talent and we work as a team. And I don't really care what my title is. I don't care. I have a vision. I know I have weaknesses as well. And then you bring people in to kind of balance that out. And that's how I think the Palestinian people deserve the most professional, effective, impactful organization in the world to serve them and to serve their cause, especially during this moment now. And if we don't put full effort and full attention to every opportunity, but every area that needs full support, then I'm failing. And after 30 years of doing the work that I've done, there's so much more that I could do. So I had to leave to go on and to do something I think greater. As much as PCRF will always be my baby. It's one that we built with the support of thousands of people all over the world, but really with my first wife, Huda. People don't even know what we went through in those early years, and I'm proud of it. But it's time to move on and do, in my opinion, even a broader scope and have a take on a bigger responsibility, especially for the people of Gaza right now. What they're going through is just beyond the scope of words or comprehension. So that's really what it was. There's some other factors I can't really talk about, but and maybe next year I'll be able to. But right now, the most important thing is I want to look forward. I want to focus on positive things that we can do to serve the Palestinians. There's so much work to do. I started on January 1st with no money at all, and but all I do have is my name and reputation, and I hope the support of people who understand that I'm here to serve. And I think there's so many more ways that we could do work and empower our communities abroad to increase the scope of our work on the ground. And I wish PCRF the best. It was my baby. I wish I could have done all this work in PCRF, but it wasn't meant to be. And but I'm committed. Doesn't matter what organization. Honestly, it matters what the work is. And HEAL Palestine. To get onto your second question, if you don't mind.
Yeah, no, please. Yeah.
Kind of like interviewing myself when I start doing stuff like that. I apologize, Ed.
No.
Look, I think in the health sector right now, so what I had been doing the last year or so in Palestine, last couple of years, was leading a process of identifying needs on the ground in the health sector and addressing them strategically. So, within and identifying areas where services in the health sector were not adequate to meet the needs of the children and the patients there. So, for example, there's no pediatric cardiac surgery in Gaza. 500 babies are born with heart disease every year in Gaza. We were building a program to find ways to treat those kids through training doctors, bringing in medical teams, training nurses, building up services. That's one example. Multiply that by 40 or 50 different specialties, and we had a group of international volunteers who all have firsthand experience volunteering in Gaza as doctors and nurses who were guiding that process. So they would guide us as to what programs need to be initiated, and it was our job to initiate those programs. That's what I strongly believe in, and that's what we're going to continue to do in HEAL. We're identifying needs in the health sector that we can have an impact on and then address those needs in the most effective way. Do the same in education, do the same in aid. And then in the leadership component, which is what the last part of HEAL is about, is when the time comes to start the rebuilding process, build a platform in which you can start bringing in every child that's been directly affected, either through bodily harm or the killing of their parents, where they're orphans, and start a process of mentoring those children through our international community of volunteers, thousands of them, who want to be involved in healing and rebuilding the lives of these kids, and develop a platform and a structure in which we can, for the long term, identify the needs of these kids, whether they're material, educational, psychological, and address those in a most effective way, as much as one can. We have two injured boys now in Boston, a 15-year-old and a 5-year-old, with terrible injuries, burns, amputation of the leg, permanent injuries. But the more serious injury to them is that they lost their entire family, their mom, their dad, their siblings, their aunts and uncles, their cousins were all killed. Only their grandmother survived. So healing those scars is even a bigger challenge, but also a bigger responsibility for us as a community. And what I see now, having built PCRF and made it one of the most successful organizations in the world, we can do that because we have a community of intellectuals, of professionals, of doctors, lawyers, accountants, executives, engineers, whatever. It doesn't matter really. What we have a community of people who want to be more involved than what we're asking them to. I think it's an insult to our Palestinian brothers and sisters to go and say, give us money, give us money. That's your only role, is to be a donor. It's not your only role. That's a role, and it's an important role because we have to feed people, we have to build hospitals, we have to do whatever, but that's not the most important role. The most important role that I can get out of a doctor, for example, is to give his time and expertise to treat a child. The most important role I can get out of, an educator is to help rebuild the education system. So I think we have much, much more to do with our community that can be done if we built the right structure and start leading it in a professional way in which people feel that their time and energy being mentors or being supportive of the organization's mission can be much more effective for the long term. Because again, we are responsible for this genocide, whether you're, every American, every person in the world, whether even if you're 100% supportive of the Palestinians like you and I are, we're responsible for it. It happened on our watch. It's happening right now, and we can't stop it. So we share that responsibility. Now, what can we do to heal these kids? Is much, much more than what we've been doing. And that's what HEAL Palestine is all about. We want to empower on a grassroots level a more holistic approach to responding to this crisis in a way that's going to be effective and that's going to help rebuild the lives of these kids. And if I was not able to do any, if that's the least I can do at this time, then I'll feel that this transition away from PCRF was the right thing to do. It is the right thing to do, but it's even going to be more effective when we're able to have this kind of impact for the long term on the lives of these kids in Gaza.
When I attended your event for Heal Palestine, I'm going to try to keep a straight face and keep my composure here. But, uh, you brought two people on stage, essentially, to sort of talk about their experience. And one of those individuals, my wife and one other person was trying to console this person, give her love, give her support. And my wife and this other individual started to cry. And this person, I'm not saying her name on purpose. I don't know if I should or shouldn't, but she looked directly at them and said, "Don't cry. You're gonna make me cry. We don't cry. We will persevere." And how do you respond to that?
I mean, the kids in Gaza are the most resilient people. People of Gaza are the most resilient people in the world. That, I mean, what they've gone through, not just since October 7th, what they've been going through for generations there. I mean, let's remember those 8 refugee camps of Gaza were established in 1948, 1949. They've been living under hardship and under suffering and sacrifice, enclosure and siege for generations. And they're the most resilient people in the world. And it's the young people there, because, almost half the population is young, who carry that energy of resilience, that continuation of humanity. I see it all the time. The kids there are just amazing. The people there are amazing. And, they're very strong. They have a very strong faith. I respect that. That's what gets them through these moments of crisis. It's more than a moment of crisis. Um, and that's where I think we have to also rise up and show that same level of strength. Crying is fine. And we all should cry for what we see every day in Gaza. If you don't cry, if it doesn't affect you as a human being, then you're probably not really a human being, in the sense that, seeing our brothers and sisters from any background having their lives destroyed, being starved to death, being killed, small babies every single day, that should affect you as a human being in a deeply emotional way, and you should cry about it. But the more importantly is that we use our energy, because all of us are angry, all of us are depressed, all of us are sad and despair, but we don't want to be hopeless. We want to use our energy to do something positive. And when these kids come and they get up and tell their stories, it's important to hear what they say, because they're telling you what they've endured. But here they are still speaking out. They've not given up. They're still human. And they want us to stand with them and to find ways to help put an end to this madness and also help rebuild their lives. And that's what we're dedicated to in HEAL Palestine.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that she consoled my wife, my wife actually came after that occurred. She was crying and she said, "That's Sumud right there.
Yeah.
That's the pure definition of Sumud." So look, many of us in the diaspora feel helpless. We don't know what to do. And what you said earlier, you articulated something very well, because nobody knows what to do or how they can help. And I think you even know when for example, when you did a couple events or tours yesterday, I'm just going to be broad on purpose. You notice that everybody just wanted to do so much to help these young kids. But sometimes we just don't know what to do. And you said something that I find fascinating is it's not about money. It's about your expertise. It's about your time. It's about what can we do for those of us that feel helpless, which I am one of them. I still feel helpless. That's one of the reasons, quite frankly, I started this podcast. I'm trying to amplify voices and support. But what else can we do?
I mean, there's so many things to do that there's a long list of them. And the first and foremost is to stay engaged and stay involved in supporting the work on the ground that's necessary right now. Obviously, people are being starved to death. Children are being starved. They're being denied medical care. They're being denied shelter, clean water, basic necessities of life. And I think it's all of our responsibility is to get through this acute phase um, of destruction, of genocide, of killing, until we get to that next phase of rebuilding. So right now we have to continue to find ways to support people on the ground, whether it's kids coming here to this country and getting medical care, volunteering help support them. Whether it's raising money to feed people on the ground there, yeah, money is needed for that, obviously, but then be ready when the time comes to be more involved in other ways, because that time's going to come, and then we have to be prepared to meet that moment when rebuilding the lives of kids isn't about money, although there may be that component to it. It's more about time and energy and support and consistency and discipline. And all of us have to be ready for that. In the meantime, let's make sure that we save as many lives as possible, that as many people get fed and get shelter and get the medical care they need as possible now. And therefore, continuing to support all of those initiatives, as well as let the world hear your voice, let elected officials hear your voice, demonstrate, be involved in the political process. I mean, look, we right now, if the election was held, the current administration would not be reelected, and that's partly because of their position on Gaza, and that's never ever happened in the history of the American political system. And as a result, I think policies are going to change, and that the next leaders of that party, and probably both parties, particularly the Democratic Party, is going to have to take into account that there is a red line when it comes to genocide, and that there are limitations that your allies can do when they take your weapons and take your aid. And if you don't impose those, then you're going to continue to lose elections. So I think we'll see policy changes. But the amazing thing is that when we saw Michigan organizing the undecided vote, and in other places, the impact that it's had is tremendous. And those are ways that people should be involved as well. But most of all is that you don't give up. You don't give up hope. You don't give up your responsibility. There are ways, even if, and let's not always think of the big picture, because, ending an occupation or ending a genocide is often beyond the ability of any of us. It is always beyond the ability of any of us individually. But if you can help individual patients, or you can help do things that have an impact on the ground, even on a small scale, those things add up to be effective on a large scale. So you have to stay involved, and you have to encourage your kids to identify themselves as Palestinian. Give them the culture, give them the language, give them the identity, and let them also carry the flag in the future as well, because this is a long-term struggle. It's not going away today or tomorrow, unfortunately. The struggle for freedom and equality is one that will have to be the next generations to carry. We have to prepare them for that struggle as well, and make sure that you are part of that with raising your children, and being a role model for what a true Palestinian looks like in this world of destruction and genocide that's going on right now.
Yeah. My wife, I think I mentioned, is a nurse, and she didn't sleep very well yesterday. And after the event, what can we do? What can we do to help heal Palestine? How can we help heal Palestine? What's the message for everybody? What's the best way to support the objectives that you're putting forward?
Yeah, so I spread the word. I mean, again, there's a time coming very soon, and it all depends on what happens on the ground in Gaza, when there's going to be a role for everybody who wants to be involved to be a mentor of these kids. But what we can do now is just build up the name and the organization, so people are aware that an organization that's grassroots, that is, both bringing kids here and sending doctors there, and building a maternity department, and building a NICU, and feeding thousands of people a day, and building shelters on the ground, and expanding the food distribution to the north, and supporting Gaza doctors to finish their medical degrees so they can rebuild the health system in Gaza, paying their tuition in Egypt, so on and so forth. We're doing all these incredible things, building a mental health program to help with our physicians in Gaza who are highly traumatized. So we're doing so many things, and so many more things we would like to do, as long as we have the support and the resources to do it. So spread the word and get active, and be involved in what we're doing, and let people know that this organization exists. But also prepare yourself, because there's a time coming when you're going to need to dedicate a day or two, a month or a week, to help rebuild and heal the lives of these kids that are currently being destroyed every single day in Gaza. We have that responsibility. We're taking it on. It's not a small responsibility, but it's one that's only going to be successful when people come forward and be a part of it. And we're going to need the support of thousands, and probably tens of thousands of people globally, to be involved in this program.
And you'll let everybody know when that time comes.
Yeah, we're building next Saturday. I'll be out building the platform out in the Silicon Valley to manage and scale a mentorship program at the size that's going to entail thousands of people. Will require significant structuring of kind of a cloud-based program, but we have the manpower and the brain power who are willing to do it. And so once we have that platform ready, we're going to start signing people up, identifying what areas that they could be useful as a mentor. And then once the time comes on the ground in Gaza, in which we can start bringing in kids to be involved in this program, we'll start connecting people and training the mentors, and setting guidelines in which this program will be successful.
So I know I'm not a medical doctor, but please call me when it's time to help out in other areas. Will you make that promise? I'll be one of your first phone calls.
I don't use the phone that much, but I'll definitely reach out to you some way.
WhatsApp me. That's fine.
There you go.
WhatsApp.
Yeah.
So I have just a few more questions. Right now, there is sort of this internal battle or this internal fighting amongst Palestinians, part Palestinians and non-Palestinians, of the work that they're doing, the fundraising, the questioning. They're calling each other out. I'm not sure if you're aware of any of this. As an OG, if you will, as an elder statesman of Palestine, what's your message to these groups?
I mean, I'm kind of marginally aware of it. Um, I think it's been something that's been going on. It's more of a leftist thing. I'm sorry to say. The left has always kind of eaten itself over the years. We saw that, historically. I mean, if you read Homage to Catalina by George Orwell, one of my hero writers, just read that book and you see how the anti-fascist movement in Spain just destroyed itself.
Hmm.
The Franco forces of the fascists were all united. Um, and I think historically, the left has always tried to keep an element of purity um, on its side that often has a detrimental effect to the larger goal of liberation and equality. So I'm not sure what's happening on this side. I don't follow that too much. At least I haven't been it hasn't been brought to my attention that much. I really try to focus on my work more than kind of internal struggles. But unless there's something of substance, we have allies on our side from all walks of life, from all even political ideologies. Our tent of liberation for Palestine, for equality of the Palestinian people to be equal to everybody in the region, whoever they are, to end an occupation, should include everybody who shares the main goal of a peaceful, democratic Palestinian free country entity. And that includes Islamists, it includes Christians, it includes our Jewish brothers and sisters who share our values, it includes academics, it includes workers, it includes everybody. Nobody has ownership of the Palestinian struggle. Nobody. Of course, it is the Palestinians who should lead it, not me. But I think we need to focus on what our goals are to serve the people there. And infighting, unless it's based on any legitimate reasons, if people are stealing money, for example, if people are supporting occupation or supporting structures which are, against women's equality or against, gender equality, whatever, if there's people who are doing that, they should be called out. But if you have a different ideological viewpoint or, you have a different perspective, or even you're not Palestinian by birth, there's a place for people to be part of this struggle and should be allies. But I don't know. Maybe you can enlighten me on what you're talking about exactly.
Yeah, I will after the interview. I don't want
It's
to
me.
name names. Yeah, no. It's Zach will actually talk about that too right after this.
Okay.
But there's just a lot of infighting, and you're right. It's a generational piece as well, for sure. I think that's a good point as well. So just two more questions. One, I always ask the guest. Two, I promised my daughter I would ask you, my younger daughter, if you remember the twins. If you could tell your younger self one thing, what would it be?
Oh gosh, if I could tell my younger self, um, that's a good question. Uh, I think it's just you have to work hard. Like, I mean, I feel sometimes that's lost on people because life has gotten pretty easy in the U.S. For most people, I know there's a lot of people who have to work hard to get by in our country. There's no question about that, and God bless them. But for a lot of kids, the hard work came from their grandparents and from their parents. And I think to make anything in life that's going to be effective, you have to just fully dedicate yourself and not get caught up with the noise on social media or people speaking or the negativity. If you believe in yourself, if your heart is pure, if your focus is true and your intentions are pure, just don't give up. And you're going to fail. We all fail. But just keep going and keep learning and keep trying and never close yourself off from trying to improve yourself to be a better person, to be better at what you're doing. I think that would be the advice that I would give myself.
I would like it on record that it took us 90 minutes for you to say that I asked a good question. So I do appreciate. I did get one in.
All your questions were good.
I appreciate that. And then my daughter, she said, "Please ask almost Steve one question." And it's a hard question. I don't know how you're going to answer it, but it's very clear. When will Palestine be free?
Oh my gosh. Well, I should have to ask her that because it's going to be her generation. It's going to be soon. I mean, the things are changing now. We've seen a whole generation of young people coming up who are leading the liberation struggle, and who understand this issue from a human perspective, and who no longer buy into the lies or to the BS. So I think, this is when you have to destroy an entire society, um, in such a brutal manner, and even to the extent where you're starving people and then lie about it. That's the last vestiges of an unattainable, unsustainable goal and position. So obviously, we have a long way to go because our leadership in this country doesn't reflect the vast majority of people, particularly young people. But it's going to change. The people who are in their 20s now, have come to our side and understand this issue, are going to grow into positions of power. And I think the Great Gaza Genocide is going to be one that they'll remember always, that they have a responsibility to the Palestinian people to finally give them the rights that they've been denied for generations, at no fault of their own. And I think so within your daughter's lifetime, there will definitely be a free Palestine.
I
Maybe
appreciate
not in
that.
mine and yours, Ed, but maybe not in mine, but definitely in your daughter's.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Any parting words you'd like to share with anybody who's listening about Heal Palestine, or any directions of where to go, where to visit?
Oh, sure. That's easy. It's healpalestine.org. It's easy to go and visit. Reach out to us. Reach out to me anytime. I try my best to stay in touch with anybody who connects with me. Not always as quick as I would like, but understand that, we're trying our best. But I always feel honored for anybody who wants to be involved and to support. And the last thing I just want to say is how honored I am and privileged I've been in my life. Whatever tragedies I've had, losing my wife, losing my organization, PCRF, whatever, um, I'm honored and privileged to serve the Palestinian people and the Palestinian cause, and that I will never give up my duty and my responsibility to continue to do whatever I can to help the Palestinian people, particularly during this period. And my focus will always be on doing the best the best work I can in a positive way, and to continue to help Palestinians until I'm no longer on this planet.
I would like to reiterate and end with this: you are 100% Palestinian,
Oh,
and it's a pleasure to say that. So thank you so much, Steve.
it's my pleasure. Thank you.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time zone you're living in, it's time for Sumud. All about humanity, so this right here for everyone. Uplift, amplify, empower everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time zone you're living in, it's time for Sumud. Listen, stay tuned, cause it's time for Sumud.